So I want to introduce you to someone who I had the pleasure of spending some time with earlier this year in Mumbai in India. Just an amazing young lady with the most infectious smile that I've ever seen. And her name is Carine Bouery. She's a multifaceted professional with multiple skill sets who believes we were born to discover and uncover our infinite gifts and untapped superpowers to help solve the biggest problems in the world. Don't you love that? She says that we pick the parts that we play in. Yeah, it's so right. Her part is in workplace happiness. The corporate world needs a cultural and ethical revamp where fairness, kindness, and togetherness lead the systemic design and strategic decisions of organizations. Creativity, agility, and synchronicity are her superpowers, and using them helped her lead the change with others like her and with organizations who hold the same purpose. An award-winning coach and trainer and powerful communicator, Carine is going to help us today by unpacking the science of empathy and social connection. So, Carine, if you can just start your video and come on right now, that would be fantastic. Let's give her a round of applause as she's coming on, and this is going to be a lot of fun.
All right.
Fantastic.
Hi, Grant.
Hey, how
Hi,
you doing?
everybody. Good.
Hey, sorry to put you on the spot like this, but I know you are flexible. It says here, one of your superpowers is agility, so I knew it wouldn't be an issue for you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and mute myself up, and I'll get on to Ivana and help her with what challenges she might be having. So, hey, over to you.
Okay, so I start my presentation then.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be fantastic.
So, hi, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Grant, for allowing me the opportunity to, present a little bit of what I've learned. And just like you, Grant, I'm a work in progress myself. I don't consider a master of things because I'm a perpetual learner, just like everybody else. And the thing about workplace happiness, it touched me greatly because of the injustice, let's say, and the misery and the sickness, the toxicity that was going on, whether it is directly or indirectly, actively or passively. And as I was studying the workplace of happiness, the workplace happiness, and this I began 5 years ago, I came across the science of happiness. So, in order to understand what organizations need, we need to understand the components of what makes a great organization. How do we make employees happy? And then one of the things that we look at is emotional intelligence, of course, which this entire summit is about. And a component of emotional intelligence is empathy. And so I'm a big believer that we need a radical change with our relationships, our connections, especially at work, because we spend most of our time at work. But right now, I'm going to be presenting to you just a generic presentation about the science of empathy and social connections, not really geared to work. So let's get started. If I were to tell you, look at this picture, okay? I want you to look at this picture and I want you to notice what you're feeling. What kind of emotions are springing up from you? Now, with this picture, when we see a baby like this, we'd be like, "Oh, what's wrong? Why?" So there's something happening there. There is an emotional engagement, but it's again, if we compare that to this picture, for example, the very famous picture by Kevin Carter, photographed and was published in the New York Times in 1993. And this photograph actually won a Pulitzer Prize. So when we look at this picture, what kind of feelings come up? Are we feeling the stress? Are we feeling the stress that we know that this little girl is about to die and this vulture is going to eat her? What kind of other feelings do we get? Helplessness, because we can't seem to do anything about that. So compare these kind of emotions to what we saw earlier about with the baby picture. You can start to understand how empathy and compassion in our systems start to play. And we're going to talk more about that. But before I get into it, I'd really like to highlight something about the Enlightenment era. It was one of the most progressive times of human history. And it was the result of back in 18th century Europe, there were many religious wars, there were many political uprisings that were going on, and so very similar to what we're seeing today. And I really believe we need to look back at the Enlightenment era of human progress and realize that it was at that time where sympathy, reason, and science were used to enhance human flourishing and to create a more just and fair world. And it's always, and for the last century, it's always been about me. The me meaning I want this, I want to make sure I have this. We introspect, we look inwards. But today, in this time and era of our human progress, we need to start looking at the we and how we come together, and why is this necessary? Because by understanding others, we start to understand ourselves even better. And we're going to dive deep on that. So let's see. So how does that really look? So if you look at the me, which is the human being, and then the environment, which is the we, how we all interact together, what's going on? How do I influence my environment? And I influence it in this way. In my system, I've got values, I've got beliefs, I've got even my own psychological biases. And from there, I start to get thoughts about the world. So, for example, I have a bias towards, let's say, homosexual people. And my thought is, oh, they're not good. And then I get these emotions when I think about, this thought that they're not good. I get angry, I get bitter towards them. And then what happens when we have these biases or beliefs that generate certain thoughts that in turn generate emotions? We start to display certain types of behaviors that are, in this case, negative. And what does that do to our environment? It creates a negative environment. So now we all know this and we see this on the outside, but in reality, this is all biology. And this is what this presentation is going to be about. So let me tell you a little bit about our biology as we get into the science of empathy and social connections. According to Dr. Sonia Lumbrowski, she's a psychologist at the University of California, Riverdale. She, through her lab studies, she found that there are certain percentages influence our levels of being happy or what kind of experiences we have. So in this chart, or in this image here, we see that only 10%, so events on the outside, only 10% of that is determined, or our happiness or our experiences is determined by events, and that's only 10%. And then you see 40% of our experiences is determined by our choices, our thoughts, and our behavior. You can see here on the top left of this graph. And on the right side, we see that our experiences in life and our happiness is genetically or the majority of our experiences come from our genetics. So, meaning we'd be very lucky if we were born out of funny parents. Now, if we were not, that doesn't mean we can't be happier or we can't generate more positive experiences in our lives, because we've got the 40% that can work in our favor of what we saw earlier, with this me to the we arrow here. So the main message of this slide is that we need to get more mindful and intentional about our thoughts and emotions that generate certain types of behaviors. And then we need to understand why these thoughts come up. What kind of values, beliefs, and biases do I hold? And then go even deeper by understanding our biochemistry and neurology, and realizing that sometimes innately there are things we can't control. But through intention and through mindfulness, we can change that. And which leads me to this beautiful concept. Imagine yourself as the fish in this fish bowl. If we never changed the water of this fish bowl, what would happen to the fish? Of course, it would die. We have to change the water, and we know this because this is what they say. We not only feed it, but we also have to clean its water for it to continue to thrive in its environment. This is the same as emotions. If we are encapsulated by negative emotions, be it from other people or from ourselves internally, we will become sick. And that can affect us on a cellular level, according to science. And why do I mention emotions? Why do I mention emotions here? It's because it's the key to unlocking our ability to empathize with ourselves and with others. And when we understand our emotions from a biological perspective, we can then unlock and take out the skills that we need to empathize and sympathize, and also be compassionate with others. I'm going to share with you a very amazing experiment that I came across recently, because what we have seen with lab studies is more experiments on our primate, the apes, and then more studies with dogs, and now recently with rodents or with rats, lab rats that they use to do these experiments. In this particular study done by a group of neurobiologists at the University of Chicago, they found that rats as well can display empathetic behavior. How? In this particular study, they put a free roaming rat inside a cage, and within that cage there was a constrained rat in a cylindrical tube. Now, this free roaming rat, with a certain amount of time, understood that it needed to free this constrained rat, and so it did, because it felt the constrained rat and it saw its feelings of distress, and so it saved it. Now, the neurobiologists introduced other rats that this free roaming rat did not even know, and yet this free roaming rat helped free this constrained new rat. And then what happened was they introduced a black rat, so that it's not recognizable of its kind. So what happened? Even though it took a bit more time, eventually this white free roaming rat freed the black constrained rat. So what does this say? It tells us that empathy is deeply rooted within us, and the most advanced, and even though empathy here is the rat's empathy here is not the same as the human empathy, but the basis is the same, and the basis is that we are upset by another individual's distress. So this is it. So what is empathy? Let's really kind of define it in more in a more definite and clear way, because a lot of people have different ideas about what empathy is. Here's a screenshot from the movie To Kill a Mockingbird, based on its novel. And here we have Atticus Finch telling his daughter, Scout, and explaining to her what empathy is. And this is what he says. He says, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. So this was how Finch taught his daughter empathy. Now, other emotion intelligence researchers define it as the ability to sense other people's emotions, coupled with the ability to imagine what someone might be thinking or going through. So basically taking their point of view or understanding their point of view. Now, how is empathy different from sympathy? I put these 2 points here because sometimes it could be misleading. So with sympathy, there's not much emotional engagement. So if I were to refer to the first picture I showed you of the crying baby, that was more of sympathy rather than empathy, because it's just an automatic emotional response by looking at a face that is in distress. And this is something we will talk about and why. And empathy is different from kindness and compassion, because empathy, you can actually feel with someone. You can actually physically feel with someone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to take action by doing something about it. So that's the difference between kindness and compassion. So why does it matter? Now, we see in general a decline in empathy and happiness levels, even though some scientists would disagree to this, and one of them being Steven Pinker. If we look at our world in data, we realize that happiness levels have increased, poverty levels have declined. But here we're being a bit more specific. And this is, again, based on studies done. The left chart, we see a study done, an empathy study done on college students in the US. And we could see that their feelings of sympathy have gone down by almost 50% between 1979 and 2009, and it's still going low. At the same time, what's also going low is their ability to imagine other people's suffering or other people's point of view. That went down to 34% from 1979 to 2009. And the chart on the left shows, and you can see the line in general going down. That's basically happiness levels around the world today using the Cantor ladder study. And the Cantor ladder study is basically saying, just rate your life satisfaction, or how do you feel about your life today overall? Rate it from 1 to 10. 10 being you're thriving, so between 8 and 10 you're thriving, and of course below 4 you are suffering and struggling. And so here the numbers on the left indicate that. So we see we are at a 5.2 and a little bit lower than that in happiness levels overall in the world. We also understood from science that when we are egocentric or when we are power hungry, it could actually damage the empathetic circuitry in our brain. I put here 2 articles for you, and one of them by Harvard Business Review. And you can check them out in your free time. Now, what really, what science says is that we are naturally egocentric, but there is a part of the brain that autocorrects this so that we are empathetic and more compassionate. And that part of the brain is the supramarginal gyrus, which does this autocorrection. Okay. Also, what we see is that the era of fast upgraded technology, which is leading us to a fast lifestyle, and making us live our lives very quickly, and making us make decisions quickly, um, also make us less kind, less compassionate, and we'll see that later. So in this particular case here, the healthcare industry, uh, I mean, touch is one of the most important elements we have as human beings, and that is now being replaced by technology. And here I put the oximeter that measures your oxygen levels, for example. So rather than caring for our patients and offering them a sense of touch, holding their hands, and we will understand what happens when we hold each other's hands or touch each other, of course, in a decent manner. We have beautiful neurochemicals being released into our system that is creating a positive emotional environment within our system. And today we're kind of losing that as technology comes in. And I put this beautiful quote by a virtual reality guru, Jaron Lanier. And he's very big on empathy, and he's so against social media himself. And you can see a lot of YouTube videos about that. So he says empathy can be turned to terrible ends because people behave like jerks when they turn into tribes or packs. The problem with the online world today is that to maximize engagement, you need to maximize emotional engagement. And the emotions that are most engaging are the negative ones, unfortunately. So why do we need to practice empathy? I put some names of scientists who took part in different studies on empathy. And this is what they came up with. By being empathetic, you are more helpful and you're less interested in delivering things that interest you and only you. By being empathetic, you're creating something called an emotional contagion. You're reducing prejudices, racism, and bullying. And we know that bullying is a very big problem today, especially in schools. Empathy allows us to become practical real life heroes and be more selfless. We will fight inequality. Here, even at work, and this is very true, having a good boss or an empathetic boss um, leads to leads to less of a likelihood of developing heart disease, for example. This is also a study there. And having an empathetic boss helps increase levels of happiness at work. So in general, we enjoy better health. And this is something now the police force is looking into, understanding how to practice empathy in order to handle crises in a more effective manner and also tackle racial prejudices. So psychologists have put empathy into two types, but there is, of course, a third layer to it. So the first type is cognitive empathy, which in a way is not really sympathy, but it's understanding the point of view or the thinking process of another person. And that doesn't necessarily require any kind of emotional engagement. This is what we call perspective taking. And then the second type is emotional empathy, is that you're actually feeling what the person is going through physically, emotionally, and mentally, because it hits you on a deeper level. That's also called affective empathy because it affects you. You actually feel it. And that creates something called an emotional contagion, becomes contagious. Now, if we go a level deeper, you can have emotional empathy, like I mentioned earlier, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to take any of the person you're feeling with. But when you do that, that's called compassionate empathy. And I just want to quickly show you how cognitive empathy and emotional empathy look different in the brain. So different parts of your brain are being activated as you use cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. And let me just also mention that sociopaths or psychopaths sometimes develop a great ability in cognitive empathy, but they use it to manipulate others. There's no emotional engagement, and that's why they could be quite good at manipulating people, because they have high cognitive empathy skills used in a negative way. So let's now look at our biology, and how is it that we can empathize? What's in our biology that makes us as such? So we are known as Homo empathicus. So psychologists have revealed that we are primed and wired for empathy, social cooperation, and mutual aid. And that begins by our strong attachment relationships in the beginning of our lives, especially in the first 2 years of our lives. So there is strong evidence that empathy has deep evolutionary, biochemical, and neurological underpinnings. Here's another phenomena of what we call mirror neurons. Now, there's a huge debate about mirror neurons. However, they have been identified previously and by a group of Italian scientists who did studies on apes. And basically, mirror neurons, they are a subset of brain cells that fire when we watch others engage in activities and express emotions. So, for example, I saw you pick up a jar. You made a kind of funny looking face. You actually, identify with it. So well, and again, I'd like to refer back to the baby picture. When we see the baby in distress with that sad face, that automated response, they say, is because of the mirror neurons that exist in our brain. We will probably see this coming up later on by other experts who are going to present more about neurosciences and applied neurosciences, and they can talk to you about that. And why can we empathize? Because of the reward circuitry that exists in our brains. And I mentioned this a little bit when I said egocentricity and power can damage these empathetic circuitry. And this is exactly what we're seeing. And here I put an image of how negative emotions play out in the brain and how positive emotions play out. So you can see the green area is where all the positive emotions are being activated, and then the blue area is where most of the negative emotions are happening. And sorry, not just the green dots, but also your value levels of yellows to red indicate positive emotions. So why aren't we good at it? Why aren't we good at empathy? So again, according to research, we're more likely to help a single sufferer than we are to help a large group that we don't know, we don't see, we don't identify with. Secondly, empathy can be quite exhausting, especially when you get really taken into the emotions of another person that you forget your own. So this is where emotional intelligence should come in, and our ability to regulate how much we can do of that so that we don't lose ourselves in the process. And I'm sure you're learning a lot about that in the summit already. So, and another thing about empathy is that we tend to think and look at the world from our lens, from our point of view, rather than other people's point of view. So we tend to think we know everything that's going on in the other person's mind, heart, body, and soul. And then we tend to make judgments, and then we don't behave in the way that looks or feels empathetic. And of course, when we can't do anything about helping someone, especially looking at that picture of the girl and the vulture waiting for her to die, these feelings of helplessness can sometimes lead to indifference. And that's a bit not so good. So empathy in our brain, what's really interesting, and this is done by Dr. Tanya Singer. She's done many studies on pain and empathy in her lab. And it turns out that the areas in the brain where pain gets triggered is the same area where empathy gets triggered. So on the left, you see, of course, the pain, the trigger is quite higher. And empathy it's the same region of the pain, but we kind of feel it, but not as much as if we were experiencing the pain ourselves. So this is very, very interesting. And empathy is also in our genes. This is something I discovered also recently. I'm not sure you all know about oxytocin. Oxytocin is this wonderful neurochemical that gets released by touch, by physical intimacy, through motherhood, and it's also known as the trust molecule or the love molecule. Now, what's so interesting about oxytocin is that it is that single gene that influences our empathy. However, it's got 3 different variations, and now you'll understand why we all empathize on different levels. So what they found in this gene are these 3 variations called AA, AG, and GG. And they found that those with the GG variation of oxytocin were able to empathize much more than their counterparts, AA and AG. So this is actually a very, very new information for me as well. Another beautiful a biological structure that we have in our system is the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is what connects our brain to our heart area or chest area down to our digestive region. So it's sort of like the link that links these 3 major intelligences in our body: our mind, heart, and gut intelligence. A lot of studies now are being done on gut intelligence and on heart intelligence, not enough on the heart though, but that's now coming. So the beautiful thing about the vagus nerve is that feelings of compassion and kindness activated, and feelings of pride and egocentricity reduce it or weaken it. So what does the vagus nerve do when it's activated? It helps us breathe better. It controls our heart rate. It keeps our blood pressure stable. It activates our immune response in the correct manner. So it's that thing that's working in the background. It's like almost like our subconscious mind and our subconscious functionalities in our brain, in our body, that is happening unconsciously to us, but consciously to our body. So it's so important to keep this vagus nerve healthy and activated using empathy and compassion. Then, of course, we have the reward circuitry. And through lab studies, we found that giving emotional support in comparison to just holding hands or no support at all makes us feel so good about ourselves. So it's quite rewarding that we give emotional support. And it's as the feeling of reward is the same as what we think makes us happy. So if, let's say, I got the new iPhone today, that makes me happy. So that's kind of feeling of owning a new iPhone, the iPhone 12, is more or less the same of the kind of reward sensation we'll feel in providing emotional support. And I'm talking at the moment itself. We also have the ability to touch and to use our voice to convey emotions. And by using these beautiful things, and as you hear me now, I have quite a tonality of voice tonations here, and you can sense the points at which I talk about something in a more passionate manner, and then some things I talk about in a less passionate manner. So voice plays an important role and in conveying emotions. So and I put 2 pictures here, which is so funny because it's also culturally influenced. So here there were a bunch of scientists who observed people in a social environment, and they found that with British people sitting together, nobody touched anybody, not even a tap on the hand, a tap on the shoulder, nothing. In comparison to Puerto Ricans, for example, in a sit down of 1 hour, I believe it was, they exchanged 180 touches. So it kind of tells you a lot as to why certain cultures have a certain character, right? We British are perceived to be colder, let's say, than Latin American people. So again, perception, and all this can be changed once we get intentional and mindful about our thoughts and our actions, and the 40% that can still help us change our DNA and our cells. We also have built-in peacemaking abilities, and that's so important when it comes to interacting with other human beings, because we're not perfect, we'll make mistakes. And so in these particular photographs, these people were asked to share an embarrassing moment in their lives, and the camera caught them doing this, with their head going down to the side, the eyes down, touching the face. So this side gesture of the face exposes the neck, which biologically, or let's say neurologically, we understand that as vulnerability. So here the message is, I'm right now being vulnerable, I'm feeling embarrassed, so please, I'm here asking you to trust me, to forgive me, and to reconcile with me. So it's the silent language that we have with each other through our body language. And then cooperation. Cooperation comes more intrinsically and is actually more fun and rewarding than to humans than competition is. Cooperation exists everywhere. It's out there in nature. Think about how the ants work together to build their home, to deliver food into their homes. We've got different species of fish. There's the type of the big fish that allows the smaller fish to come in and clean the teeth of the big fish, and basically gets food out of that. So the big fish is getting the benefit of getting its teeth cleaned, and the small fish is getting its benefit of getting food that is stuck between the teeth of the big fish. So in nature that happens. Even this happens in our bodies. We are alive today because our cells and tissues and everything, our systems, are cooperating together to make us talk, to make us blink, to make us breathe. I mean, this is a miracle on its own. And here's a study by Robert Sampson. He found that neighbors that cooperate, or neighborhoods that have a community that cooperates more and act very well together and are kind with each other, have better child health. They have more high school graduation rates. They have a longer life expectancy and reduced crimes and social disorder. So isn't that amazing? So speaking of connections, let me go back to the rat experiment. And in this particular experiment, they took a newborn rat and completely raised it in a separate environment away from all of its kind, rat species and everything else. After a certain period of time, these rats, as they grew, they were introduced into this cage. So now we see the same setup that we saw the first time, of a free-roaming rat with a constrained rat inside this cage. Now, this free-roaming rat, in this case, it's come from a disconnected social background. It had no connection with its kind whatsoever. And what's fascinating to see is that in this particular experiment, that free-roaming rat that had no connection of its kind whatsoever did not even think to help the constrained rat, and did not even open the door. And they tried that with the black rat. Same thing with the black rat. So there you go again. What's amazing here is that the empathy is not just determined genetically, but it's also determined environmentally. So think about our kids, for example. If they were to grow up or to study in a school that has multiple cultures of people, how would that look like as they grow up to be an adult? When children get exposed to other people of different races, nationalities, religions, and so forth, what will that say about their empathetic skills? It will definitely improve. So this is the message here. So at the end of the day, our purpose on this planet is to connect with others and to serve others. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. So I'm just going to take you through now how to cultivate the empathetic, your empathetic skills. And I will refer to Dr. Roman's empathy book and why it matters and how to get it. So let's talk about the first habit. So highly empathetic people are very curious people. They're curious about everyone and everything. And I know sometimes it's difficult to approach someone you don't know and talk to them. This is why curiosity, once you find that feeling of curiosity, it can then lead to developing the ability to be courageous and to approach other people. And we need that a lot today with our networking events and so forth. So how do we develop curiosity and courage so that we are actually interested in other people? Let's go back to being children again, using our natural inquisitiveness about life. You know how kids ask you, why is that? How is that? So let's get into that again. Let's question everything around us. Let's really try to understand the world from the lens of another person by really being curious about what they think and what we're seeing in terms of body language. And make time for more informal but deep conversations. And I'll give you an exercise on that. If you struggle to start small talk with complete strangers, here is a lovely reference set of questions that you can use. And this is the 36 love questions developed by Dr. Arthur Aaron. And these questions are basically, once you use them with a complete stranger, you start to develop not only empathy towards them, but also love to a certain degree. And today, the police force in the US or parts, I'm not sure in which state in the US, but they are using the 36 questions or love questions to adapt for the police force in order to tackle racial discrimination and handle crises, especially around racial prejudice. So I highly encourage you to look at the 36 questions or love questions by Dr. Arthur Aaron. You can Google that and you'll see the 3 sets of questions that get deeper and deeper and deeper as you go. Habit number 2, highly empathetic people challenge prejudices and they look for commonalities. Again, they're very intentional about that. So and how do you do that? You search for what you share as a human, and we're all human beings and we all want the same things. We want good health, we want to be happy, we want to be wealthy, and we just want to have a life that's filled with all of that. So find these commonalities with this person despite their race and religion. Sometimes when we can't find commonalities or when our biases, whether psychological or biological biases, get in the way of our ability to talk to someone who's very different from us, then distance yourself physically distance yourself. Don't, instead of reacting and getting really worked up inside with negative emotions, distance yourself, physically distance yourself to gain perspective. And then once you are physically distant, take a piece of paper or use your phone and write down at least 3 things that you can find that you have in common with this other person. Now, if you can get into the habit of doing this all the time when you meet somebody new, trust me, your empathetic circuitry will be activated, and that part of your brain will become a natural part that you will start to use when you go out there and interact with people who are different from you. So, and when you're in the moment having that, let's say, heated conversation or difficult conversation with someone you don't understand or someone who's different than you, then start with this statement by saying, I'm curious to know why you acted this way. I'm curious to know why you said these things. So use the word curious here, because it has the ability of taking you out of your emotional state and really becoming cognitive about it. So now we're exercising our cognitive empathy skills when we are curious. Habit number 3, try another person's life. And we've seen so many social experiments on that. At work, you could actually try being in the shoes of your colleague, doing something that you want to learn more about. For example, you're in marketing and you know you're not so good in finance. You can take the shoes or actually be your finance person for just the day to understand and see what this finance person gets throughout the day, the things they're tackling on a routine basis, and so forth. And by experimenting ourselves, by experiencing this firsthand, we learn more. The learning gets embedded faster. So other ways you can do, or what other ways you can try, are volunteering. For example, volunteering is a great way to see what's going on out there and really doing something about it. Here you're exercising not only your empathy skills, but your compassionate skills. And then get into the habit of noticing and acknowledging people's efforts and achievements and milestones and successes. Be happy for them. Recognize it. Send them that random message and tell them, hey, I noticed your post on LinkedIn. It was a very interesting article that you put there. I'm very proud of where you are today. So get into the habit of giving each other more compliments. And when you do that, you're activating your empathy. Here is a list of 100 random acts of kindness and an exercise by the University of California, Berkeley, that you can do. And this exercise, of course, is science-backed. And it shows that by doing 5 acts of random kindness for 5 different people in one day of the week can really shoot your empathy and happiness levels by 60% or more. So just by dedicating one day a week to do 5 random acts of kindness to 5 complete strangers can really make a difference, can really help you feel rewarded and happy as a person. So, and these random acts of kindness can be from simply opening the door for someone to let them through, to baking a cake for a friend and surprising that friend with it. So it could range from many different things. So you can Google that 100 random acts of kindness and get all your ideas from there. We got 2 more habits to go, and I hope I'm okay with time. I'm not sure, Grant, but habit number, we have to practice the art of conversation. That means we need to even use empathetic language, nonviolent communication. So, and there's a very good exercise by, of course, all the exercises I'm referring to here, these science-backed exercises, are by the University of California, Berkeley, the Greater Good Science Center research arm of that university. All their experiments and studies take place there. And all these exercises I'm giving you are all science-backed and can work once you commit to them. So what do we mean by having a great conversation skills is we listen hard, we open up, and we really care. And if we don't feel we care, then again, use that cognitive empathy side of your brain by paraphrasing what was said. So when you heard somebody complain about something, paraphrase it using their words, not your words. Ask different questions, and of course, express concern and understanding. And I'm going to give you an example here. Look at the difference in this chart and in this graph here, or this image. I really love the difference here because it really shows you the difference between being empathetic and being, let's say, more cognitive or dismissive. So, for example, if I were to say, you know, I embarrassed myself, I really said this in a meeting that I was not supposed to say, you know, and then that person who's listening to you say, hey, this happened to me too, you know, once this, once that. So suddenly the focus is to that person and their experience, while this person might think that by offering them an example from their experience could help you deal with your own experience. It sometimes doesn't work like that. So what we need to be saying is, that sounds heavy, or yes, I can understand, I can relate. How can I help you? I'm here for you. And the thing that we tend to say a lot is, at least you didn't die, or at least you didn't get fired. This at least is also diminishing that empathy you're giving, because what happens to the person listening to the word at least, it makes them feel like, oh, then I'm being extra sensitive, that my feelings are not validated and I'm not supposed to be saying anything. So on the contrary, all emotions and thoughts are validated as long as we can sit down and talk about them together in a constructive way. Now, Roman, the author of Empathy, the book Empathy, and the researcher behind the 6 habits, he really believes that empathy is not just a fluffy word. It is actually a radical, transformational type of energy, and it's supposed to inspire action and change. And when we do that, it means we need to get out of our comfort zones. We need to look at the injustice in the world and do something about it. We need to look at other people's well-being and not just our own. We need to be fair and fight for equality. So, and how do we do that? Sometimes it could be a very scary thing to start a revolution. So what we need to do first is to overcome our own fears and discover our strengths. And there are many exercises we can do, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to jump to habit number 6, which is a very important one. And once we overcome our fears, we develop an ambitious imagination. Now, what do we mean about that? Let's look at Gandhi and how he was able to put himself in the shoes of his enemies, between quotes, the English occupation at the time. So by understanding our enemies, again, between quotes, or those in power or in authority, we can then start to widen our perspective of the world and have more effective dialogues with people, or with these types of people, in order to reach peace or reconciliation. Think of, for example, now we are seeing a huge shift in renewable energy, a great transition towards that. But especially here in the Middle East, we still rely a lot on fossil fuel consumption. So the ambassadors and activists and businesses in renewable energy, how can they have a more constructive conversation with people or businesses in the oil and gas industry, so that both these industries that are considered enemies start to converse with each other and talk about a smooth green transition that will benefit not only the renewable energy sector, but also the oil and gas sector. Maybe the renewable energy sector can help the oil and gas sector do things in a more sustainable way, and so forth. So this is the idea. Another idea here is slavery. Slavery was one of those things that was completely banned from our humanity. And it started by feeling empathetic to those slaves, to the exploitations they were going through on a daily basis, the trials and tribulations and the suffering and the pain that they have been going through. If it weren't for this collective, ambitious an inspirational step that comes from empathy, today slavery would still exist. Now, we still see that with human trafficking. It's still happening in the background, but in terms of policy, in terms of rules and regulations and civil rights, slavery is off the table, thanks to the power of empathy. So coming to the end of our session, Grant, I just want to say something about developing habits, and we can develop habits. And that's thanks to latest research we have found on the brain, that it is plastic and it can generate new cells. So when we talk about plasticity, we talk about the ability of the brain to reorganize itself and create new circuits in response to our environment, and most remarkably in response to our thoughts. Lifelong plasticity means that the brain is plastic throughout our lives, and it can be changed. Oops, so sorry about that. I jumped to the first slide again. Oh, no, here we go. And then we have something called neurogenesis. Recent research has shown that stem cells in the brain can grow new neurons at any time, at any age. So the brain has the ability to generate themselves. We also found that we can teach ourselves new things that we couldn't teach our old selves, because we are continuously shedding old cells and renewing and making new ones. They say that by 1 year, 98% to 100% of our cells in our body have been completely replaced. So the Grant last year is a completely different Grant this year, because you have a new set of cellular structure. And what researchers have found with that information is that it takes about 2 to 3 months on average to learn a new habit. The least number of days is 21 days. That's why you see a lot of meditation programs, for example, that go for 21 days. It helps you start that underpinning for a new habit. However, that could progress up to 284 days, according to scientists, depending on the person themselves and how committed are they to learning these new habits, committing to positive psychology practices, and so forth. But on average, it's 2 to 3 months. Now, we've talked a lot about the brain, and we see that this is all a brain thing, and it's all biology and neurology. But really, what really starts this revolution in our biology and neurology is the heart, is opening up the heart. And this is why meditation is key. It is key to help building these new circuitry in our brain. So I put for you here a link called the Loving Kindness Meditation, developed by, again, the Greater Good Science Center, the research arm for UC Berkeley. It's one of those beautiful meditations that you can do to help open up your heart, to listen hard, not only to others, but to your own thoughts and emotions internally, and to be vulnerable. Vulnerability leads to love, kindness, compassion, a higher level form of empathy. And this is what we're trying to achieve here. So I'd really like to thank you all for listening in. And if anybody needs more information about empathy, you have, of course, Daniel Goleman and Paul Ekman as one of the pioneers in these fields. If you want to cultivate more empathy, there's a bunch of advice and a bunch of tactics and strategies you can use in this link here by the Greater Good Science Center. And if you want to really test your empathy levels, you can get on this quiz again by the Greater Good Science Center. The link is provided for you there. So I'm here to co-create happiness and harmony with all of you. And today it was about the science of empathy and social connections. I really hope you can connect with me right after this, and we can continue this conversation and revolutionary movement of human relationships forward. And thank you, Grant, for providing us with that platform.
Thank you. Fantastic. Well, hey, I don't know if I'm coming through right now. Let me just change this. I'll just go to gallery view. So, hey, I love your passion. We have gone way over time, so we don't have the time for questions. So, if you do have questions, get them to me. I'll get them to Carine, and we'll definitely get back to you. There's none anyway. I think people are just amazingly, like, just full of so much happiness right now that they haven't got any questions. So let's just give Carine a big round of applause again. Thank you so much for being part of our summit, and I'll catch up with you again really soon.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you. And now we're going to have a quick break, and then we're going to come back and hear from the amazing Ivana Stulic.